The first time Michael Jackson performed in public. He was so small they had to bring a box for him to stand on. But his voice was already so powerful that grown men in the audience started crying. It was May 15th, 1963, at Garnett Elementary School in Gary, Indiana. The school's annual spring talent show was a modest affair. Proud parents, supportive teachers, and students performing their rehearsed pieces in the small auditorium that doubled as the school cafeteria during lunch hours. Nobody expected anything particularly special that day. Certainly, nobody imagined they were about to witness the first public performance of someone who would become the most famous entertainer in human history. But when 5-year-old Michael Joseph Jackson stepped onto that makeshift stage, something happened that changed the trajectory of music forever. Michael Jackson wasn't originally scheduled to be in the talent show. At 5 years old, he was considered too young by the school's organizing committee. The talent show was typically reserved for students in 3rd grade and above, children old enough to have developed some stage presence and confidence. But Michael's older brothers, Jackie, age 12, Tito, age 10, and Jermaine, age 9, were performing as a singing group called the Jackson Brothers. They had been practicing for weeks, harmonizing in the tiny living room of their small house at 2300 Jackson Street. Michael had watched every rehearsal with an intensity that made his mother, Katherine Jackson, wonder what was going on in her youngest son's mind. While his brothers sang, Michael would mouth the words silently, his small body swaying to the rhythm. "That boy's got it in his blood," Katherine told her husband Joe Jackson one evening. "I think he knows those songs better than his brothers do." Joe, ever the pragmatist and taskmaster, dismissed the idea. "He's 5 years old, Katherine. He can barely reach the sink to brush his teeth. He's not ready for performing." But Katherine saw something in Michael that Joe hadn't yet recognized. A natural gift that transcended age, size, or experience. On the morning of the talent show, disaster struck the Jackson family. Jermaine woke up with a severe case of strep throat. His voice was completely gone, and the doctor ordered complete vocal rest for at least a week. The Jackson Brothers' performance slot was at 2 p.m., just hours away. Joe was furious, seeing his son's chance to shine slipping away. Jackie and Tito were devastated. "We can't perform without Jermaine," Jackie said. "The harmonies won't work with just 2 of us." That's when Michael, who had been listening quietly from the kitchen doorway, spoke up in his small, clear voice. "I know all the words," he said. "I can sing Jermaine's part." The room fell silent. Joe looked at his youngest son with skepticism. "Michael, you're 5 years old. You don't even go to school yet. This is for the big kids." But Katherine, who had been watching Michael absorb music like a sponge for his entire short life, made a decision that would change music history. "Let him try, Joe," Katherine said firmly. "What's the worst that could happen? If he can't do it, the boys just won't perform. But if he can..." She left the possibility hanging in the air. Joe, reluctant but desperate, agreed to let Michael try. They had 2 hours before they needed to leave for the school. "All right," Joe said gruffly. "Let's hear it. Michael, you sing Jermaine's part. Boys, you do yours." What happened in the next 3 minutes shocked everyone in that small Gary, Indiana living room. Michael didn't just know Jermaine's part. He knew every part. And more than that, he sang with a precision, power, and emotional depth that seemed impossible for someone who hadn't even started elementary school. His voice, though young, carried a richness and control that adults spend years trying to develop. His timing was perfect. His pitch was flawless. And most remarkably, he sang with a feeling, a connection to the music's emotion that couldn't be taught. Catherine started crying. Jackie and Tito stopped singing and just stared at their little brother. Even Joe, hardened by years of factory. When the Jackson family arrived at Garnet Elementary School, Michael was wearing his Sunday best. A white shirt that was slightly too big, dark pants that Catherine had hemmed the night before, and shoes that had belonged to Jermaine. Mrs. Dorothy Bennett, the music teacher who organized the talent show, was surprised to see the Jackson family arrive with 4 boys instead of 3. "Mr. Jackson," she said, consulting her clipboard, "I have the Jackson brothers scheduled. That's Jackie, Tito, and Jermaine. Who's this little one?" "This is Michael," Joe explained. "Jermaine's sick, so Michael's going to take his place." Mrs. Bennett looked down at Michael, who barely came up to her waist, and frowned with concern. "Mr. Jackson, he's awfully young. Are you sure he's ready for this? Some of these children have been preparing for months." "He's ready," Catherine said with quiet confidence. "You'll see." The Garnet Elementary School auditorium could hold about 200 people, and it was nearly full that afternoon with parents, teachers, and students. The stage was a simple wooden platform, about 3 feet high, with heavy curtains on either side. When it was time for the Jackson brothers to perform, Mrs. Bennett introduced them with enthusiasm. "Please welcome the Jackson brothers, performing 'Climb Every Mountain' from The Sound of Music." Jackie and Tito walked onto the stage with the confidence of experienced performers. But when Michael followed them, audible whispers rippled through the audience. "That child is tiny. How old is he? Can he even reach the microphone?" The microphone stand was adjusted to its lowest setting, but it was still too high for Michael. For a moment it seemed like the performance would have to be canceled. Mr. James Crawford, the school janitor, was watching from the side of the stage. Seeing the problem, he quickly disappeared and returned moments later with a wooden Coca-Cola crate, the kind used to deliver glass bottles. "Here," Mr. Crawford said, placing the crate in front of the microphone. "Try this, little man." Michael stepped onto the crate. Now he could reach the microphone. He looked out at the audience. 200 faces staring at him. The pianist, Mrs. Helen Washington, began playing the introduction to "Climb Every Mountain." Jackie and Tito started singing the opening verses, their voices blending nicely but not particularly memorable. Then it was time for Michael's part. What came out of that tiny 5-year-old body shocked everyone in the room. Michael's voice was powerful, clear, and impossibly mature. But more than technical ability, there was something else, an emotional depth, a connection to the song's meaning that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his years. "Climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow till you find your dream." Michael sang with his eyes closed, his small body swaying slightly, completely lost in the music. He wasn't performing. He was feeling. And that feeling was pouring out of him in waves that washed over the audience. The effect on the audience was immediate and profound. The skeptical whispers stopped. Parents, who had been half watching while chatting with neighbors, fell silent. Teachers, who had been grading papers in the back, looked up in astonishment. Mr. Robert Thompson, a steelworker who had come to watch his daughter perform, later described the moment. "I was sitting there waiting for my little girl's turn, not paying much attention to the Jackson boys. Then that tiny kid opened his mouth and I swear to God I got chills. My wife grabbed my arm and whispered, 'What is happening?' We'd never heard anything like it." Mrs. Patricia Morrison, Michael's future kindergarten teacher, was in the audience that day. "I teach children Michael's age every day," she said years later. 5-year-olds can barely tie their shoes or remember their lunchboxes. But this child was singing with the emotional intelligence of someone who had lived a full life. It was impossible, and yet there it was. As Michael reached the climax of the song, something extraordinary happened. Several men in the audience, steelworkers and factory workers, men who had spent their lives doing hard physical labor in the industrial heartland of America, began crying. When Michael finished singing, there was a moment of complete silence, as if the audience needed time to process what they had just witnessed. Then the applause began. But it wasn't the polite, supportive applause typical of elementary school talent shows. This was genuine, thunderous, standing ovation applause. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Parents who had come only to see their own children perform were calling out for an encore. Mrs. Bennett, who had been skeptical about letting such a young child perform, was standing in the wings with tears streaming down her face. "In 23 years of teaching," she later told the local newspaper, "I have never seen a performance like that. That child has a gift from God." The applause continued for 5 full minutes. Michael, standing on his Coca-Cola crate, didn't know what to do. He looked at his brothers, who were smiling and clapping along with the audience. He looked for his mother, who was crying tears of joy. Finally, Michael did what came naturally. He smiled, waved shyly, and took a small bow. After the talent show, the Jackson family was surrounded by teachers, parents, and community members who wanted to talk about Michael's performance. "You need to get that boy professional training," said Mr. Charles Baker, who directed the church choir. "That's a once-in-a-generation voice." "I've never seen anything like it," said Mrs. Elizabeth Johnson, a music teacher from the high school who had come to scout talent. "If you're not already thinking about a professional career for that boy, you should be." Joe Jackson, who had been skeptical about Michael performing just hours earlier, was now seeing possibilities he hadn't imagined. Catherine, who had always believed in Michael's gift, felt vindicated and proud. But for Michael himself, the experience was overwhelming. The attention, the praise, the excitement. It was a lot for a 5-year-old to process. "Mama," Michael said quietly as they drove home, "did I do good?" Catherine turned in her seat to look at her youngest son. "Baby, you did more than good. You showed everyone what I've always known. You have a gift, a very special gift." That night, after all the children were in bed, Joe and Catherine Jackson made a decision that would change their family's destiny. "Michael has something special," Joe said. "We need to be smart about this. We need to train him properly, get him and his brothers performing professionally." What started as a last-minute replacement at an elementary school talent show became the beginning of the Jackson 5. Within months, Joe had the brothers performing at local clubs and competitions. Within 2 years, they were gaining regional attention. Within 5 years, they would be signed to Motown Records and become international superstars. Mrs. Dorothy Bennett, the music teacher who organized that talent show, kept a photo from the event for the rest of her life. In the photo, you can barely see Michael behind his brothers, standing on his wooden crate. "People always asked me if I knew that day that Michael would become the king of pop," Mrs. Bennett said in a 1985 interview. "The honest answer is no. I didn't know he would become Michael Jackson, the superstar. But I absolutely knew I had witnessed something extraordinary. That child had a gift that transcended normal talent. He didn't just sing the song, he lived it. Mr. James Crawford, the janitor who brought the Coca-Cola crate that allowed Michael to reach the microphone, later said it was the most important contribution he ever made to music history. "I was just trying to help a little kid reach the microphone," Mr. Crawford recalled with a laugh. "I had no idea that little kid would grow up to be the most famous entertainer in the world. But I'm proud that my Coca-Cola crate was there at the beginning." That wooden crate, by the way, was kept by the Jackson family for years as a memento of Michael's first public performance. May 15th, 1963, at Garnett Elementary School, wasn't just the first time Michael Jackson performed in public. It was the moment when a natural gift was revealed, when a destiny was set in motion, and when the world got its first glimpse, though nobody knew it at the time, of someone who would change music forever. Michael Jackson's first performance reminds us that greatness often announces itself early. Talent can't be hidden. It demands to be expressed, shared, and celebrated. But more than that, Michael's story shows us the importance of the people who recognize and nurture that talent. Catherine, who believed in him when others dismissed him as too young. Joe, who saw the possibilities and created opportunities. Mrs. Bennett, who allowed him to perform. Mr. Crawford, who brought a box so a little boy could reach his dreams. It takes a village to raise a superstar, and May 15th, 1963, was the day that village came together to give Michael Jackson his first chance to show the world what he could do. The first time Michael Jackson performed in public, he needed a box to stand on just to reach the microphone. But even then, from the very beginning, his voice was big enough to fill any room, touch any heart, and change the course of music history. Every legend has a beginning. For Michael Jackson, it was a spring afternoon in Gary, Indiana, a wooden Coca-Cola crate, and a song about climbing every mountain and following every dream. He spent the rest of his life doing exactly that. If this incredible story of Michael Jackson's first performance moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that greatness often starts small, but dreams big. Have you ever witnessed someone's first moment of discovering their gift? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the origins of legendary talents.